The garden hose slipped from my hands and hit the concrete with a wet slap. My neighbor Lisa's words hung in the air like poison. Old women shouldn't interfere. I'm Margaret, I'm 67, and I've lived on Maple Street for 34 years. In those 3 decades, I've seen neighbors come and go, watched children grow up, attended more funerals than I care to count. But I've never encountered pure malice quite like what was living right next door to me. That Tuesday morning in June, I was watering my prized tomatoes when I heard sobbing coming from the Martinez house across the street. Elena Martinez, 78, was sitting on her front steps in her nightgown, clutching a piece of paper and crying like her world had ended. Because maybe it had. I shut off my hose and crossed the street. Elena looked up at me with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Margaret," she whispered, "they took everything, my life savings. 47 years of my husband's pension, gone." That's when I heard the cold laugh behind me. Lisa Thompson, my 5-year-old neighbor with her perfectly manicured nails and designer workout clothes, stood on her front lawn smirking. "Old women shouldn't interfere," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Some people deserve what they get." Everything about that moment felt wrong. Elena's devastation was real and raw, but Lisa's reaction was satisfied. Too satisfied for someone witnessing a neighbor's tragedy. I knew something was seriously wrong, but I didn't know how deep the darkness ran. Over the next 3 days, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. Lisa's house had visitors at odd hours, well-dressed people arriving after 10 p.m., staying for exactly 1 hour, then leaving with briefcases. Her trash cans were always fuller than they should be for someone who claimed to work from home as a lifestyle blogger. But it was the phone calls that made my instincts scream danger. Late-night conversations I could hear through our thin, shared wall, discussions about targets and acquisition timelines, and emotional manipulation protocols. These weren't the words of someone selling essential oils or promoting wellness retreats. Elena's situation haunted me. A widow loses her entire life savings to what the police called a sophisticated online romance scam, and my neighbor finds it amusing? The timing felt too convenient. The cruelty felt too personal. Let me tell you about the players in this twisted game. Lisa Thompson moved in 18 months ago with no job history anyone could verify, driving a BMW she supposedly paid for with passive income from social media. She's 35, charming when she needs to be, but underneath that Instagram-perfect smile lives someone who sees vulnerability as opportunity. Her fatal flaw isn't greed, it's the absolute absence of empathy. She genuinely believes some people deserve to be destroyed. Elena Martinez has lived across the street for 20 years. She's 78, a retired school teacher whose husband died 3 years ago from cancer. She's trusting because she spent her life believing in the good in people. That trust was about to become her greatest liability. Then there's Henry Chen, 82, who lives 2 houses down. Retired accountant, sharp as a tack, but recently diagnosed with early-stage dementia. His daughter visits twice a week, but she works full-time and can't monitor his every move. And finally, there's Tom Wilson, 74, the widower, at the end of our block. Lonely since his wife passed, spending his days tending his garden and hoping someone will stop by for coffee. His adult children live across the country and call once a month if he's lucky. All of them had one thing in common: they were exactly the kind of people predators target. Before I tell you what I discovered next, I need to ask you something. Have you ever suspected your neighbor of something terrible but had no proof? Have you ever felt that sick feeling in your gut that tells you someone is dangerous, but everyone thinks you're being paranoid? Please subscribe and comment below about what you would do if you suspected your neighbor was preying on elderly people in your community. Because what happened next changed everything. Let's continue. I started my investigation the way any concerned neighbor would, by talking to people. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Mrs. Patterson, 71, who lives 3 blocks over, had been contacted by someone claiming to be a lonely soldier stationed overseas. Over 6 months, this soldier had convinced her to send nearly $15,000 for emergency medical procedure. The voice on the phone was always female, always sympathetic, always urgent. Mr. Rodriguez, 79, had received calls from someone claiming to be his grandson, desperate for bail money. The caller knew enough details about his family to be convincing. He'd wired $3,200 before his real grandson called later that day. Betty Walsh, 68, had been befriended by a young woman who visited weekly, offering to help with errands and technology. This helpful neighbor had slowly gained access to Betty's computer, her mail, and eventually her bank accounts. Betty lost $23,000 before her son discovered the fraud. The descriptions of the helpful young woman were consistent. Blonde hair, designer clothes, drives a BMW, always perfectly groomed. Claims to be a lifestyle blogger. Lisa Thompson. But this was just the surface. The real horror was still buried beneath layers of careful planning and manipulation. I needed evidence, not just suspicion. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I started documenting Lisa's activities. Every visitor was photographed from my kitchen window. Every license plate was recorded. Every piece of mail I could see in her overflowing mailbox was noted. What emerged was a sophisticated operation that made my skin crawl. The late-night visitors weren't random. They arrived on a schedule. Mondays for the woman in the red Lexus, Wednesdays for the man with the silver briefcase, Fridays for the young couple who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. Each meeting lasted exactly 60 minutes, but it was the mail that broke the case wide open. Lisa's mailbox was constantly overflowing, and our postal worker, Jim, had been complaining about it for months. One particularly windy Thursday, several pieces of her mail scattered across the street. I helped Jim collect them, and what I saw made me sick. Credit card statements in names I recognized: Elena Martinez, Henry Chen, Tom Wilson. Bank correspondence for accounts that shouldn't exist. Most disturbing of all, copies of death certificates for people who were very much alive. Lisa wasn't just scamming elderly people. She was systematically destroying their identities, their credit, their entire financial existence, and she was doing it with military precision. The woman I dismissed as a shallow social media influencer was actually running a criminal enterprise that spanned multiple states. What I discovered next still gives me nightmares. I started volunteering at the local senior center, not because I'm particularly charitable, but because I needed to understand the scope of what Lisa was doing. The stories I heard, there painted a picture of systematic elder abuse that went far beyond financial fraud. Martha Stevens, 83, had been receiving daily phone calls from someone claiming to be conducting a wellness check for Medicare. These calls gradually became more personal, more intrusive. The caller knew Martha's medical conditions, her medications, her doctor's appointments. Eventually, the caller began offering assistance with Medicare claims, assistance that required Martha's Social Security number, banking information, and personal identification. The caller was a young woman with a sweet voice who claimed to be a certified Medicare advocate. Martha trusted her completely. Why wouldn't she? The woman knew everything about Martha's medical history. But Medicare doesn't make unsolicited wellness calls, and certified Medicare advocates don't ask for banking information over the phone. George Kumar, 79, had been befriended by a young woman who started visiting after his wife went into hospice care. This woman was incredibly kind, bringing groceries, helping with household tasks, providing emotional support during his wife's final weeks. She even attended the funeral, crying alongside George as they lowered his beloved Mary into the ground. 2 weeks after the funeral, George discovered that his wife's jewelry was missing. Her life insurance policy had been changed to name a beneficiary he'd never heard of. Checks were being written on accounts he didn't remember opening. The helpful young woman had used his grief as a weapon against him. The descriptions were always the same: young, blonde, well-dressed, incredibly sympathetic. Claims to work in healthcare or social services. drives a luxury car, always knows just a little too much about her victims' personal lives. Every single victim described Lisa Thompson, but the most chilling discovery was yet to come. Because Lisa wasn't working alone, and her victims weren't random. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, my own mailbox. I'd been so focused on watching Lisa that I almost missed the piece of mail that had been misdelivered to my address. It was addressed to Margaret Chen at my address, but my last name is Davis. The return address was for a life insurance company I'd never heard of. Inside was a policy application for a $500,000 life insurance policy on someone named Margaret Chen, 67 years old, living at my address. The application included my actual medical history, my doctor's information, and my Medicare number. Everything was accurate except the name. Someone was taking out life insurance policies using real people's information but fake identities, and they were doing it systematically. I called the insurance company immediately. What they told me made my hands shake. Margaret Chen had been approved for the policy because all her medical information checked out perfectly. The payments were being made automatically from a bank account that had been opened online. Beneficiary was listed as Lisa Thompson, caring neighbor and family friend. But Margaret Chen doesn't exist. I'm Margaret Davis, and I'm very much alive, and I definitely never applied for life insurance with Lisa Thompson as my beneficiary. That's when the true scope of what was happening became clear. This wasn't just fraud, it was identity replacement on a massive scale. Lisa and her network weren't just stealing from elderly people. They were systematically erasing them from existence and replacing them with fictional identities that they controlled. The late-night visitors weren't clients or customers. They were other operators in the network, coordinating targets and sharing information. The woman in the red Lexus brought medical records stolen from doctors' offices. The man with the briefcase provided fake identification documents. The young couple handled the digital side, creating online presences for fictional people and managing the financial accounts. Henry Chen's early-stage dementia wasn't just making him vulnerable to scams. It was making him the perfect target for complete identity replacement. They could gradually take over his entire existence, and his confusion would mask their activities until it was too late. Tom Wilson's loneliness made him desperate enough to trust anyone who showed him kindness, even if that kindness came with a price he couldn't imagine paying. Elena Martinez's grief over her husband's death had left her vulnerable to romance scams, but those scams were just the beginning. They were softening her up for the complete takeover of her identity. And I was next. The night I discovered the life insurance policy was the night Lisa showed her true face. I was in my kitchen making tea when I saw her standing in my backyard. Not near the fence line, not in the shared space between our properties, in my backyard, just outside my kitchen window, staring directly at me. I opened the back door. "Lisa, what are you doing on my property?" She smiled, but it wasn't the practiced Instagram smile I'd seen before. This was something cold and calculating. "Hello, Margaret. I think we need to have a conversation." "About what?" "About your sudden interest in other people's business. About the photographs you've been taking. About the phone calls you've been making to insurance companies." My blood turned to ice. She'd been watching me just as carefully as I'd been watching her. "I don't know what you're talking about." She pulled out her phone and showed me a picture. Me, standing at my kitchen window, camera in hand, clearly photographing her house. "Really?" "Because I have about 30 photos that say otherwise. And I have recordings of some very interesting phone calls you've made recently." Lisa stepped closer. "Here's what's going to happen, Margaret. You're going to stop playing detective. You're going to delete any photos you've taken. You're going to forget everything you think you know. And you're going to mind your own business like a good neighbor should. And if I don't?" Her smile widened. "Accidents happen, Margaret, especially to elderly women who live alone. Falls in the bathroom, medication mix-ups, gas leaks. So many ways an old woman can die unexpectedly." She wasn't just threatening me. She was telling me exactly how she'd killed before. Oh, and Margaret? That life insurance policy in your name is already active. The only question is whether the beneficiary claim gets filed sooner rather than later. She turned and walked back toward her house, calling over her shoulder. Old women really shouldn't interfere. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen with every light on, holding my phone, trying to decide who to call. The police would want evidence I didn't have. My children lived across the country and would just worry. My neighbors were either too elderly to help or didn't know me well enough to believe such an incredible story. I was exactly where Lisa wanted me, isolated, frightened, and alone. But she'd made one critical mistake. The next morning, I did something Lisa never expected. I called her mother. Finding Lisa's family had taken 3 days of searching social media, cross-referencing property records, and following paper trails. But I finally found her, Patricia Thompson, 58, living in a retirement community in Arizona. Mrs. Thompson, I'm your daughter's neighbor. I'm calling because I think Lisa might be in some kind of trouble. There was a long pause. What kind of trouble? I told her everything. The scams, the identity theft, the threats, the life insurance policies. I expected disbelief, denial, maybe even anger. Instead, I heard crying. Oh my God, Patricia whispered. She's doing it again. Again. Mrs. Thompson, what do you mean again? Through her tears, Patricia Thompson told me the truth about her daughter. Lisa had been scamming elderly people since she was 16 years old. It started with a part-time job at a nursing home where she stole credit cards and medications. By 20, she was running sophisticated fraud schemes that targeted senior citizens across 3 states. We tried everything, Patricia sobbed. Therapy, intervention, even having her arrested. But she's so smart, so charming. She always found ways to avoid serious consequences, and the victims, they were always too ashamed to press charges or too confused to testify effectively. But there was more. 3 years ago, she came to visit me here in Arizona. Within 6 months, 4 residents in my retirement community had died unexpectedly. All of them had recently changed their wills to include a generous bequest to helpful young neighbor Lisa Thompson. The deaths were ruled natural causes, heart attacks, strokes, medication errors. But the timing. Patricia's voice dropped to a whisper. I think my daughter is a murderer, Mrs. Davis, and I've been too afraid to do anything about it. That afternoon, Patricia Thompson flew to my city. She brought with her 3 boxes of evidence she'd been collecting for years. Documentation of Lisa's scams, witness statements from previous victims, and most importantly, recordings of phone conversations where Lisa had bragged about her crimes. You see, Patricia had been secretly recording her daughter's visits for months, hoping to gather enough evidence to finally stop her. What she'd captured was a complete confession of multiple murders, dozens of identity theft cases, and detailed plans for expanding the operation. Lisa Thompson wasn't just a scammer or even a murderer. She was a serial killer who used financial fraud as her hunting method. Working with Patricia, I contacted the FBI's Elder Fraud Unit. Within 48 hours, federal agents were conducting surveillance on Lisa's house. Within a week, they'd identified her entire network and traced the scope of her crimes across 7 states. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after she'd told me that old women shouldn't interfere. I was watering my tomatoes when the FBI van pulled up. Lisa walked out of her house in workout clothes, probably heading to the gym to maintain her perfect image. She saw the agents approaching and actually smiled, thinking they were there for someone else. The look on her face when they said her name was something I'll remember forever. Complete shock, then calculating assessment, then pure rage as she realized her perfect system had collapsed. But the most satisfying moment came when she saw me standing in my garden, watching her get handcuffed. Our eyes met across the fence, and I did something I'd never done before in 34 years of being a polite neighbor. I smiled and waved. The investigation revealed the true scope of Lisa's crimes. 43 elderly victims across 7 states, over $2 million in stolen money and fraudulent insurance claims, and evidence suggesting she'd murdered at least 7 people to cover her tracks. Elena Martinez got her money back, plus damages. Henry Chen's family was able to stop the identity theft before any serious damage was done. Tom Wilson and the other neighborhood targets were protected before they became victims. The network was dismantled. The other operators were arrested. The system that had destroyed so many lives was finally stopped. But perhaps the most important outcome was something unexpected. The experience changed our entire neighborhood. Elena, Henry, Tom, and I became more than just neighbors. We became a community watch system that no predator could penetrate. We learned to recognize the signs of elder abuse. We created phone trees to check on each other daily. We established protocols for verifying any unexpected financial or medical contacts. Most importantly, we learned to trust our instincts when something felt wrong. Elena Martinez, who'd been devastated by the scam, became a volunteer speaker for the Elder Fraud Prevention Network. Her story has helped protect hundreds of other seniors from similar crimes. Henry Chen's family moved him closer to them, but not before he helped us create a neighborhood security system that's become a model for other communities. Tom Wilson is no longer lonely. Our daily check-ins turned into genuine friendships, coffee visits, and a support network that enriches all our lives. And me? I learned that being an interfering old woman isn't an insult, it's a superpower. When society tells us to mind our own business, to not get involved, to stay quiet and invisible, they're asking us to abandon the wisdom and courage that come with age. Here's what I learned from 3 weeks of terror that changed my life forever. Evil relies on good people staying silent. Predators count on neighbors who don't want to interfere. The phrase, "mind your own business," is a weapon used to protect criminals. The moment Lisa Thompson told me that old women shouldn't interfere, she showed me exactly what I needed to become. Interfering old women are the ones who catch predators. We're the ones who have time to pay attention, wisdom to recognize patterns, and courage to act when something's wrong. We're not supposed to be invisible. We're supposed to be vigilant. If you suspect elder abuse in your neighborhood, don't hesitate. Investigate. If something feels wrong, trust that feeling. If someone tells you to mind your own business, make their business your business immediately. Subscribe to this channel if you believe in protecting the vulnerable. Comment below and tell me about a time when you trusted your instincts about someone dangerous. Share this story with anyone who might need to hear it. And remember, the next time someone tells you that old women shouldn't interfere, smile and say, "Watch me," because sometimes interfering old women are exactly what the world needs,